Now we are going to create the project folder for the app and place the HTML, CSS and JavaScript files in there. So let's go to the websites folder and create a new folder and call it drawing app. So we're going to be using jQuery, jQuery UI and HTML5 canvas. Okay, so we're going to open this folder using brackets. Okay, so let's create our index.html file. So we're going to use a basic HTML template. Okay, let's change the title to drawing app. Okay, now let's create a CSS file and call it styling.css, where we're going to be placing the decoration of our website. And also let's create another file, the JavaScript file, and call it javascript.js. So let's go back to the index.html file. So let's link our file to the CSS file. I'm going to use a link element and give it a relationship of style sheet and an href going to the CSS file. All right. Also, we're going to need to link the file to the JavaScript file. So at the end of the body element, let's have a script with a source going to this file. Okay, and then we're going to be using later on jQuery and jQuery UI. So let's make sure we embed these into our file. So we're going to go to the Google CDN. Okay, so let's go to jQuery first, and let's get jQuery from there. And let's get the jQuery UI. So first we need to download the style sheets. So you're gonna have a link in the head elements, okay? And also we're gonna need the script element, and we're gonna make sure that this script is placed after the jQuery script. Okay, so now let's save. Okay, now let's start building the skeleton of the app and decorate it. So first of all, let's add this nice background image to our website, and also make sure that all the elements inside the body are centered. So we can use again the pixabay.com website to get a nice loyalty-free picture. So once you have downloaded the picture, you can place it inside our projects folder, or just create a new folder there, call it images. Okay, and then place the file inside it. Now let's go to the CSS file. Okay, let's go for the live preview first. Okay, so you're going to be accessing the body elements. So we are going to center all elements and add background image. So First of all, to center the elements, we're going to use the text align property and set it to center. For the background image, we're going to use the background property. Okay. And then we're going to use the URL function. And we're going to go to images, then paint background. Now we need to center this image using the values center and center. And also we're going to fix it so that it doesn't move when we scroll down or up. Also, to make sure that the image spreads across the whole screen, we're going to use the background size property that we're going to set to cover. Okay. Now let's move to the title. So to create the title, we're going to use a div. Let's give it an ID header. Okay. And let's place some text in there, drawing up. All right. So here is our title. Now let's style it. So we're going to access it using its ID. And we're going to start first by setting this nice background color using some linear gradients. Okay, so we're going to use the background property, and then we're going to use the linear gradient function as we've done before. So you must be familiar with this function by now. So I'm going to use a couple of colors. So we're going to start from white and then go to blue. Okay. So we're going to use the RGBA function for the blue color, and we're going to go for 67, 169, and 228. And we're going to add some transparency there, about 0.9. Okay. Now let's set the height and the width. Okay, so let's go for a height of 80 pixels and a width of 500. Okay. Now let's make sure that our title is centered. So we're going to use the margin property and set that to 10 pixels for the top and bottom sides and auto for the left and hand sides. And now it's going to be centered. All right. Now let's change the font size, make it bigger. So we're going to go for 3 EM. And also let's change the color to a white color. Now let's control the height of the title. Okay. So to do that, we're going to use the line height property. So if we set that to 0 pixel, the line is going to be around the top border. So if we increase that, then we're going to start moving away from the top border. Okay, so we're moving down. And if we keep increasing, 80 pixels looks fine. All right. Just for cross-browser compatibility, we will need to duplicate the background line since we're using the linear gradient function. Okay, and just add -sign WebKit for the WebKit browsers, Chrome and Safari, and then -sign Moz, -sign for Firefox, and then -sign O, -sign for Opera, and then -sign MS, -sign for Internet Explorer. Now let's move to the other elements. So first we're going to create the color inputs and the line thickness input using a slider. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a div and then place all these inputs inside the div. So we're going to limit the width of the div, okay, using a class we're going to define in a bit. So let's go back to the index.html file. Okay, so now we are looking at inputs. So let's create our div. So we're going to give it a class for styling. So let's call it input container. Okay. So we're going to start with the color input. So to create a color input, it's quite simple. It's an input of type color. Okay, so we're going to place that input inside a div so that we can control the height of all these elements. So each of these inputs is going to go inside a div. So it's going to be a div of class input that we're going to use to set the height. Okay. And let's give it an ID as well. Color input. So inside we're going to have our input, which is an input of type color. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So you can see our input there. If we click on it, we can see colors we can choose from. But we would like to see a list of colors like this. So to do that, we can add an attribute list. Okay, and now it's going to be exactly the same. Okay, also let's give this input an ID paint color, which we're going to need later in the jQuery code. Okay, now let's move to the next input, which is the size. So first of all, we are going to create a circle like that, okay, and then we're going to move to the slider. So the circle is going to be inside a div. So I'm going to skip it for now and move it to the slider. So to create the slider, we're just going to have another div of class input. Okay, and inside we're going to have another div, and let's give it an ID slider. So we're going to use this ID in the jQuery code to create our slider. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to start by writing the document ready function. Okay. And then we are going to access the element of ID slider and then use the method slider. Okay, so if we save this, then we can see our slider there. Okay, so you're going to change the theme so that we get this blue color. So the theme we're going to be using is start rather than smoothness. Okay. Okay, that looks better. Okay, now before we create the circle, let's just add some decoration to the color input and the slider. So we're going to go to the CSS file, and we're going to start with the input container. So as we said, we are going to limit its width to 200 pixels, and also we are going to center it using the margin property, and we're going to set that to 0 and auto. Alright, now we're going to move to the input class, which is the container of each of these elements. So we're going to access it using its or the class inputs. So we're looking here at the color input, the line thickness input, and the slider. So the line thickness is going to be the circle there. Okay. So the class is input. So we're going to change the height. Okay, and let's set that to 30 pixels. Okay. Also, you will notice that the slider handle is slightly bigger in the final app. Okay, so to make it bigger, we can just set the font size. So if you go for 1.3 EM, then the handle becomes bigger. Okay. In the next video, we're going to create the circle corresponding to the line thickness, and we're going to link it to the slider.